Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. This will be our last video on the Enlightenment influence of the American Revolution. And so what we've done so far, remember, is talk about the scientific revolution, seeing shifting in paradigms and new systems of thought, how that influences social scientists and their efforts to refine society, and how that's going to influence now the American Revolution. Put together a worksheet for you. You'll see it in the assignments there, and that's due by Friday midnight. So I'm basically going to leave you alone the rest of the week. When you do that, please download it if you're going to work on your computer to do it. If you want, you can just print it out and handwrite. That's fine. But if you're going to use your computer to complete the assignment, please download it so you're not modifying the original. And just upload it into the assignments. It's really helpful to me if you can upload it into assignments rather than email it or message it or whatever else, because it's easy for me if it's all in one place. That being said, what we're going to end up doing next week is moving into the French Revolution, which is still influenced by the Enlightenment, but it's a different storyline, so we'll treat it as such. But it's a very interesting story, to say the least, with lots of twists and turns and some real intensity and some real impact. The French Revolution is as impactful, or perhaps even more far-reaching in its impact than the American Revolution, although both do work in tandem in a lot of ways. Today I want to talk about the Enlightenment influence on the earliest American government and documents and so forth. And what we're going to be looking for is the influence of these two guys, John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These are two guys, not the only two, but maybe the two most prominent thinkers regarding something that came to be known as the social contract. Now, social contract is an important concept, and here's what it means. It means that they perceive that there's this relationship between the government and the people. The government has power, but the government only gets its power because the people gave it power. So the government has power because the people gave it, and the people give the power because they expect their government to protect their rights. That's the function of the government, to protect the rights of the people. So you have this exchange, this contract. The people give the government power, and in exchange, the government gives the people their rights and protects their rights. So the guy on your left there, John Locke, is most famous for his social contract work, and then Jean-Jacques Rousseau expands on that thinking actually in the following years. But what you're going to see is a lot of their thinking, along with Montesquieu and Diderot to a certain extent, and Cesare Beccaria, these thinkers that we've gone over, you're going to see them show up in the American founding documents. So let's remember actually that first there was a different kind of government that the United States put together called the Articles of Confederation. This was actually published in 1777. You might consider it a little bit rushed, actually. It's during the war, so they're under duress. They're rushed because they've declared independence, so they have to have a government. And they also want to prove to the world, particularly France, that they're legitimate. So they have to get that government put together quickly. And they put it together purposely weak. They want it to be a very weak government. They don't want the federal government to have very much power. And so there's no executive branch. There's no judicial branch. No ability to enforce taxes. They can't support a federal government, a military, really. It's just a very, very weak government. But part of the reason they want to do that, of course, is that they were reacting to the British government. They saw the strength of the federal government in England, and they thought, we don't want that. We don't want a king. We don't want somebody to have that much power. And you can actually see a lot of that in their Declaration of Independence, which it precedes the Articles of Confederation. Obviously, the Declaration of Independence is 1776. The Articles of Confederation is 1777. But we can already see a couple of things in the Declaration of Independence. We can see, for instance, the work of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau on the social contract, and we can see also their reactionary instincts to the way the British were functioning, right? Actually, that's what the Declaration of Independence is. It's a series of accusations against the English king, uh, basically claiming that he had too much power and was abusing that power. Now, that part of the Declaration of Independence is not found here. I just have the preamble here. But after you get through this preamble, basically it's dozens of accusations against the king having too much power. And so you can see why the pendulum might swing towards a looser government, a less powerful government. I always use this metaphor, like what if the last girl you dated was like really bubbly and she loved sports and she was outgoing and loved, being around people, and she was blonde haired and blue eyed, but she broke your heart. Wouldn't it maybe be true that the pendulum would swing and the next girl you'd meet and date, maybe she would be a brunette and maybe she would have brown eyes, and maybe the instinct for you would be to go to someone who's a little quieter, a little bit more soft-spoken. Maybe you would be reactionary to that. And you can see that, I think, with the American movement here. But let's take a look at the Declaration of Independence here and just notice some of this social contract and Enlightenment language. So I've got some things underlined here, and I'm going to kind of point it out as we go. So first, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident, meaning that they exist in nature and are obvious and available to all. Now, you could say there's some things about that are biblical, right? Romans chapter 1 says, God's attributes have been known through creation since the beginning. But you also can perceive some Enlightenment thinking here. This idea of there being self-evident truths is this idea that there's these laws that govern reality. And of course, the Enlightenment thinkers were looking for those laws. And this law, they say, is that all men are created equal. They say that's a fundamental truth, and we need to order our society in accordance to that truth. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Certainly, the Declaration of Independence is theistic. Creator is a traditionally deistic way of talking about God. It's sort of the common denominator between different belief sets. What do Jewish people believe about God? What do Christian people believe about God? What about Catholics? What about Protestants? Well, they believe He's Creator. So they use this language to sort of gather people in together. And most of the Enlightenment thinkers were deistic, actually. And so they thought, okay, God created and then, left us alone. Certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's actually very nearly a direct quote from John Locke's work. Thomas Jefferson had read his John Locke, and so he quotes him in the Declaration of Independence that the government is to protect the rights of the people to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Watch the social contract come out here. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So, the people give the power to the government. So, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. Here's the contract. The government protects the rights of the people, the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The people give the government power. If the government breaks that contract, then the people can alter or abolish the government. That's actually Jean-Jacques Rousseau starting to show up. His insistence that revolution is necessary when governments are not doing their job according to the social contract, if they're not protecting the rights of the people. Now, if the people violate the contract, meaning they're violating other people's rights, then the government punishes. The government brings about justice. That's how the social contract's supposed to work. But if the government breaks it, the people should rebel, according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And so Thomas Jefferson is bringing this to bear. He's making an argument that says, here's why we had to start this revolution. We had to even declare independence because the government was not upholding the social contract. So institute a new government laying its foundation on such principles, the social contract, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So they want to organize the government in such a way as to protect their rights. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolish the forms to which they are accustomed. So he's basically saying we didn't undertake this lightly. We were forced into this. He's making an argument. And he does it very effectively. He's basically saying this wasn't on us. We had to do this. It's on the fact that the British government kept violating the social contract. So how does he finish the preamble? But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably from the same object, evinces a design to reduce them to absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. That's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that's John Locke. It's the duty of the people to create a government that will fulfill the social contract. And here, Thomas Jefferson is saying the king is violating the social contract. Now, when they institute the Constitutional Convention here and actually get rid of the Articles of Confederation and replace it with the Constitution, you see more Enlightenment influence. You see, for instance, what's called the Great Compromise, in which they brought together a system of government that would have three branches. Now, you might remember Montesquieu thought three branches was great. So they have separation of powers and checks and balances. And that's just exactly what's achieved in this Constitutional Convention and the Compromise. The executive branch is added. There's a president. Now, there's a bunch of compromises that go into how the president will be chosen and how long he'll serve and all those sorts of things. We're going to leave that for American history. Then there's a legislative branch, which was already true, but it's going to be modified. Now it's going to be bicameral, meaning two houses. And those houses actually can check and balance each other. That's what we call Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. And this is another series of compromises, and they go with, one of the plans that have been proposed with some modifications. And that's another American history story that you're going to catch up with Mr. Bruns on. And then what they do is create a federal judicial system, a Supreme Court. Before that, all the courts have been local, and basically people have been taking some advantage of that. So the judicial branch is going to be created through this, and there's going to be ongoing increasing power for that branch actually as time goes on. But the idea is that they all check and balance each other. That's from Montesquieu. There's also, during this era of the Constitutional Convention, a push to publish a Bill of Rights. Now, this is interesting because the British already had a Bill of Rights, and it was actually a pretty extensive one, and you might be able to argue pretty effectively that the British had the best Bill of Rights in the world prior to the United States. And so it's something that the American people would have been used to, and it's what they get. It's actually, in some ways, compromise regarding increasing the power of the federal government through the Constitution. They say, wait, let's make sure there's certain things the federal government can't do. They can't violate these rights. They must protect these rights, out of the social contract of John Locke. So when you look at the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, what you're seeing is a restriction of the power of the federal government, and in a way, it's putting the social contract in place, saying the government must protect these particular rights, and you're probably familiar with them. Religious rights, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, the right to assemble, the right to bear arms. These are rights that they've said, okay, the government will protect these. Now, really interestingly, many of those rights are actually put in the Bill of Rights specifically because they felt the British had violated them. Remember the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Well, what is it that the British had tried to do just prior to the war starting? They had tried to take the militia's guns and ammunition away, right? What about the freedom of the press? Well, you might remember the Peter Zenger case where the British government had tried to shut down newspapers, and the same thing had happened with the Intolerable Acts. Many of the rights that are put in the Bill of Rights are historically relevant. They're ways that they believed that the British government had violated their social contract. So you can see there's a heavy influence of the Enlightenment thinking then, with men like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, and then some of the Bill of Rights are about the judicial system. So Cesare Beccaria shows up. And so it's very clearly borrowing from and putting into place Enlightenment thinking. Hope you have a great couple of days. Let me know if you have any questions.